Hello. So I'm going to record this for posterity purposes. So this is going to be living in the engineering wiki as just a shorthand for the document that you're going to find there with the same title. So these are the guidelines for project leads. Project leads, as you know, is kind of a custom role we have designed at Antimatter to be the bridge between sort of our team and the project managers at Novo. But this can also extend to our own internal in-house projects too. So basically, it applies to any scenario where you have any external project manager or any project manager managing multiple projects. And now you have project leads to sort of facilitate that process. So let's begin with the definition of what a project lead is. So the fundamental assumption here is that all project managers are bad or insufficient. Now, this is particularly the case with external project managers because they don't have the deep insight into your team because they are not working closely with your team. So, for example, at Novo, if you have the project managers, they don't communicate with the developers on a daily basis, and they're also managing multiple projects. So they tend to be very bad at just managing the project in general. And this is something we should expect because going forward, there are going to be a lot of client engagements where the client would prefer to have the project manager internal to their team, or at the very least, they're going to have some kind of an engineering lead in their team. So this is something we have to work with. The goal for project leads is to make up for these deficiencies. So the identity of the project lead is most likely going to be something like a part engineering lead and part project manager, because the goal here is to be the unified voice of the engineering team. I'll talk more about this later in the presentation. Now, this role is also a liaison between senior associate and the consultant role, which is going to be a part of our structured pathways. And even if it is not, basically, the idea here is that if you want to move from being just an engineer to a role where you're sort of helping the client deal with their challenges, this is the place to be. This is the role that you're going to get assigned if we see the materials of consultant in you. Now, the tasks for the project leads are mainly that number one is, of course, going to be join every project related call, whether it's internal or external. Because if you are going to be the unified voice of the team, then you have to be in touch with the entire team. And you also want to have, internal calls because that is going to help you decide what the narrative from the developer team currently is, right? And you also want to maintain constant communication with the team members. I'll make more recommendations about this later because there are ways to do it that are going to be more beneficial than just daily stand-ups. And you also have to watch scope creep. So anytime there's a change in scope, you create a change order. There's going to be more about this later. The main task, which is basically the summary here, is you have to maintain transparency between the developers and the project managers. Again, one story from the entire development team. Because usually speaking, if you have an in-house project manager, they're going to be talking to everybody in the team and they're going to have a mental model of what everybody is thinking. But if the project manager is dividing responsibilities, he's working on different projects, or maybe they're just external, they are not going to have that kind of insight. So the project lead should have that voice, which unifies the narrative from all sides and then presents that to the PM. And this is the part where become the consultant. You have to guide clients. Since you're going to be the project lead, it's kind of understood that you're probably the most senior member on the team and you have dealt with multiple challenges in the past. You know how the technical stuff works, so you're better positioned to guide clients. Now in during the MVP phase, there's not much guidance to do. You just want to guardrail the client from not adding more to the scope than what you can handle or what we agreed upon. But after the MVP, this is the part where you can sort of begin to spread out your technical knowledge into market knowledge. You can make recommendations about which features to include, what technologies to adopt that are going to actually scale and give ROI. And you're also going to be responsible for coaching associates. Now, the word coach is very important. I'm not saying mentoring your teammates, I'm saying coaching, because mentoring is a bit more intimate. It's where you get, spend a lot of time with with one person to help them deal with their challenges. But that is going to take too much of your time. So you want to coach them instead. So if somebody comes to you with a challenge that you don't know how to solve just yet, you tell them who can help them out, or you just give them general directions. That's the way to do this. If you mentor them too much, maybe they'll never become self-sufficient. Now, finally, the most important responsibility is going to be helping the project manager maintain a live roadmap and a project backlog, because this is where all of the knowledge you've gathered from inside your own team and what you've talked about with the project manager is going to come together in a single place where everybody is going to agree upon that this is the state of the project, this is where we're going, this is how much shit we're in. So this is the most important part. Now, generally speaking, to achieve those tasks, there's some behaviors are recommended. Now, this is what I was talking about, that you have to have informal communication with developers, because stand-ups are insufficient. Stand-ups, everybody just comes to a stand-up and they already have some kind of an agenda in their mind that they're just going to talk about a few bullet points and then go away. That is not going to lead to the kind of insights you're looking for. You kind of looking for the kind of insights like, hey, I've been waiting on the designers, I don't receive the design, something is problematic there, I don't know, there's communication breakdown between us and somebody else, blah blah blah. You're looking for that gossip kind of stuff. So for that, I recommend having one-on-ones with teammates, including the project manager. Because if you go and ask any project manager, whether they are internal or external, about, hey, what's your update? What issues do you think you're having? They're probably not going to be as honest as they would be if you're just having a random conversation about, yeah, how's work, how's life, blah blah blah, what's stressing you out. That's going to be really helpful. But of course, there's going to be team size constraints on it. If the team size is greater than 5 people, then it's not a good idea to have one-on-ones with everybody. Then you probably want to prioritize stand-ups and have a kind of structure where you can surface those issues inside the stand-ups. Now, I've been talking about how stand-ups are not helpful, but they are generally helpful, because just to gather the internal side of the story and align everybody. So you should be having twice a week internal stand-ups inside the developer team. Uh, Maybe you could have them with the project manager included. That is the ideal way to go about this. But if the project manager is not available, have these stand-ups for like 10 minutes every day, for 10 minutes for 2 days a week at least. Another good habit to have is to maintain record of all the meeting notes. So you can use Fireflies, you can use Spinash, whatever tool you like, because you want to have references to all the client meeting minutes and every internal meeting. Because the things that get discussed in meetings, they tend to be forgotten very quickly. And if there was any kind of controversy, any kind of problem, you want to be able to reference to a certain call and say, hey, you said this at that timestamp. So this thing seems unnecessary, but when shit hits the fan, this is what's going to save you. So the recommendation here is, on top of the tools, you should also have one teammate take notes in every meeting. But if the tools are good enough, then maybe it's not sufficient, but still is a good habit to have. Now, this is the part where a lot of developers fail. So when it comes to scoping, you never want to shoot from the hip. You never want to speak without thinking too much about what the scope change actually is. So what happens in, especially during the MVP phase, is the client has a very insufficient picture of the MVP in their mind, of course, because the MVP is still not built. They don't know what the product identity is actually going to be, so they're naturally going to make a lot of changes during the MVP. So what happens is, okay, you create a feature which is according to the specifications you communicated at the start of the project, but all of a sudden the client has changed their mind and they're like, hey, how about we add LinkedIn authentication to it? How about we add something else to it? And then you think, hey, that makes sense. If I go against the client right now, that would probably signal that I don't care about the interests of the client. So what you do, you end up making promises that you should not be making. So what you want to do is adopt this phrase religiously. Every time there's a scope change inside a meeting, tell them, I'll have to think about it. I'll get back to you. That's it. If that one mistake is going to save you, that one sentence is going to save you a lot of headache, a lot of stress down the road. So whenever there's any kind of scope change communicated inside a call or on text, just say, hey, let me take my time with it, I'll tell you. The rule of thumb when scoping is to 1.5x the timeline of every known feature. So, for example, if user authentication using Google, Apple, and whatnot is a known feature to you, you have implemented this before, and you think that 3 days is a good timeline for it, 1.5x it. Say 5 days are needed for this. So, if there's a feature where you have not implemented before, but it's a well-known feature. You've seen this in pretty much every application. It does not require too much research. You have to 2x it. So if you think that it's going to take 1 week, say it's going to take 2 weeks instead. And finally, for third-party dependency, and I should include also features that are going to require some research, you want to 3x it because you can never rely upon third parties to get back to you within time. They're always going to take this sweet time getting back to you, giving their responses, and research is always going to take a long time. Now, generally speaking, for research-based features, you want to time box them, and I will discuss more about this in my presentation related to guidelines for writing proposals. But if there's any kind of research involved for a feature, you want to add buffers or you want to time box it and just settle on a decision. But you have to communicate that to the client that this may not be the best decision. Now, finally, if anything was underscoped at any point in the project, you have to communicate that to the executives on time because we can't save you if the shit has already hit the fan. Now, what are change orders? So, change orders are a formal document indicating a change in scope during project execution, which is usually initiated by the client, but there may be times when we recommend changing the scope. So, you can see the template for what the change order is going to look like in the engineering wiki. Uh, the idea here is to get sign offs from both parties. If there's any change in scope, especially during the MVPs, the client should sign it off and say, okay, I agree to changing this scope, which is going to add 2 weeks to the timeline or 1 month to the timeline, and I will pay for that duration. If you don't get that sign, the client is going to be like, hey, you guys agreed to it. You guys were going to deliver an MVP. This is the part of an MVP. Why are you asking me to pay for more? So change orders are going to save a lot of headache. And this is what you do when you tell the client, let me think about it. This is the thinking part. When you create a change order, it's going to force you to think about what you are changing in the scope, whether that's a good idea or not, how much time and cost is going to add, and then you send that to the client, and the client is aware of, okay, this is how much shit we're gonna get into if we agree to this. Or this is okay, it seems like a good investment, let's go with it. So general rule of thumb, client demands new feature or change in scope, whether in calls or in text, you create a change order. The project manager is not going to do it. They're probably going to give you the idea, but you have to initiate the change order yourself because the project manager will ultimately have to ask you, hey, how much time is going to take? Because he's not the technical guy, you're the technical guy. You know the technical details, you're the one who can actually give the timelines. And if the project manager has to ask you every single time, that is inefficient and error prone. They are most likely not going to ask when they need to ask. So before they have to ask you, you tell them yourself. Now, general tips to sort of inculcate this pseudo project manager personality in you. Always remember that over communication is better than under communication. That means if you had to say one thing on call, say that on text too. If you're assuming at any point that something is communicated, uh, do away with that assumption and actually go and do it. This has actually been a recurring problem. So, for example, there was this implicit process that designers and front end teams agreed to that, hey, once we have a design ready, we're gonna move that to this Figma space, and then you're gonna go and take a look at that, and then you can implement the design. Or there were a lot of steps in this process, and this was a very error-prone process where there was very little communication happening between the actual stakeholders, which were the front end developers and the designers. Now, the way to cut this whole thing was instead of moving things around and then expecting people to go and take a look themselves, just Anytime the design is ready, the designers go to the front end devs and tell them, hey, the design is ready, go work on this. That's it. That was a simple solution. We wasted weeks on this useless process when a simple message could have done the job. So this is like like the strongest lesson in the value of over communication rather than assuming that there is communication has happened where it has not. Now, the second point is this is a trait that you'll have to master over time. This is not something that everybody is born with. Speak the truth at all costs, because the temptation to overpromise just to appease the client or the executives or anybody on your team, just to make it look like, hey, you know your shit, you're the good engineer, you can do something in 3 days where people take 30 days, is too strong. That's the beginner's fallacy. Everything in reality takes much longer than you can estimate. So always speak the truth. Even if you think you can do it in 3 days, really look into yourself and ask yourself, are you the one going to do it? Because you are not. You probably have to communicate this to your teammates. They are going to implement it. And since there was communication in there's a likelihood that something was miscommunicated or misunderstood. They're going to fuck up. And then you'll have to create some buffer for them to actually go and get the thing done. And once the thing is done, you also have to document it. And you also have to make sure that it works in the context of the larger system. Again, you get my point. Do not overpromise anything. And also, do not give false sense of security to your teammates or executives. If something is going down the drain, just sound the alarm. Even if it's going to go down the drain like 6 months down the road, you sound it right now. Because if you don't sound it right now, we cannot prepare for it. Again, remember, leaders and managers cannot save you if shit has already hit the fan. If you're not sounding the alarm at the right time, if things have already hit, gone overboard, then it's too late. There's no point. And that brings me to the next point, which is be perceptive. You want to anticipate roadblocks, scope creep, extensions, and communicate in advance. So a lot of it could be minimized by writing really good proposals, and I have written down the guidelines for it. I'll probably be doing a presentation on that pretty soon. But generally, it's still a good idea to be constantly anticipating which feature is going to be a pain in the neck down the road. Where are we going to have scope creeps? Where can the client change around things too much and that's going to waste too much of our time? Where can extensions pop in? What's the ambiguous part of the project? You have to be perceptive about it and you have to put it at the top of your mind and communicate this constantly with the project manager. Now, remember Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. That is the rule of project management. It always happens this way. There has never been a project that was done exactly as it was communicated. And if you want to make use of Murphy's Law, you have to cultivate a culture where bad news spreads fast and good news slowly. It does not mean that there's constant negativity in the team. What it actually means is, in order for a culture where bad news can spread faster than good news, the culture has to be one of high morale and cohesion. Because if there is not high morale or cohesion inside the team, whenever there's a bad news, people are going to be like, oh shit, I'm going to be held accountable for it. I cannot let people know about this. Because if I tell them, I'm going to be the bearer of the bad news, and I'm the one who's going to be the scapegoat. So the thing the mindset you want to have about this is the more heads you have on the watch, the greater security you're going to have. So if there's any kind of bad news, so for example, maybe some part of the code has been written really poorly, and now that is going to cause a lot of trouble down the road, and one engineer on the team knows it, they're not going to try to hide it. Maybe they wrote the code. If the culture is correct, they're going to be like, okay, I fucked up there, and this is how I fucked up. This is how it's going to cause us problems, and this is how we can solve it. That will only happen if the culture is the right one. So think about Frostpunk. I don't know if you guys have played this game, but I recommend this to every project lead to play it. Because in Frostpunk, whenever there's going to be a certain storm or some kind of drought happening or any disaster is coming your way, the only way you can make sure that you can effectively deal with the disaster if there is already a high hope in the populace. Because if the populace does not trust you, the moment there is bad news, they're gonna be like, oh shit, this is doomsday. It's over. We cannot trust the leadership to do the right thing. So that's basically the scenario here. Cultivate a culture where bad news spreads fast and good news slowly. And now the last point relates to the third party and the research things I was talking about before. You want to remove ambiguity first. And this is again another one of those guidelines that are going to be related to writing proposals, and I'll go more into detail there. But the idea here is if there's any ambiguous feature in the roadmap, you prioritize that first, especially if it's high impact. And that's about it. That's the presentation. Hope you enjoyed it.